welcome to the program. In 2013, Ukraine's government and the Ukrainian society changed their course. 6 years ago, on the 21st of November, massive protests under the European Union flag erupted in the central square of Kyiv. Some people say the story continues to unfold and Ukraine's revolution of dignity is ongoing. So what kind of challenges are awaiting Ukraine? To discuss this and more, we welcome to our studio today Mychailo Wynnyckyj, Associate Professor of the National University Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. He's also the author of Ukraine's Maidan, Russia's War, a Chronicle and Analysis of the Revolution of Dignity. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's the 6-year anniversary. In your book, you've discussed how this is an ongoing process. The revolution isn't over. Why don't you expand on that for us?
Well, we very often look at revolutions as being events, right? And that's actually, I mean, you as someone who's studied political science in the U.S., you know full well that, for example, the American Revolution, it's not just about 1776, one day. It actually is a process that took 13, 15 years up until a new constitution. In the French case, we very often look at sort of the 1789, the storming of the Bastille, and then it ends up with Napoleon. The point is that revolutions are things that take time. We've had the first portion of the revolution, which was the change of government, and obviously that was probably the most dramatic of events, because we had up to 1 million people on the streets, perhaps sometimes say more than 1 million. This was a protest that lasted 3 months. It was a very long time. It became a protest movement that became, to a large extent, an example for a lot of protest movements around the world. For example, Hong Kong today, many people are using the Maidan as an example. Sadly, unfortunately, it's probably going to end in the same kind of well, we're going to have deaths in the same way as we had on the Maidan, and this is part of revolution. Unfortunately, that first stage of revolution is always violence. But then what happens after the violence, after the protests are successful, is actually kind of interesting. Usually in the sort of the global cases of revolutions, it's something that has happened also in Ukraine. We see a sort of a period of moderate reform. So certain things change, radicalization of some of the people from the Maidan or some of the people from the protest movement, because many people are not happy with the fact that the changes have happened too rapidly. Other people have lost out from the changes. Therefore, there's another set of people that are unhappy. And that sort of period of moderate reform, I guess, for the last 5 years is really coming to an end. And I think one of the things that is very important is that after that moderate reform period, there's kind of there's a fork, and we can either go the American way, which is setting up new institutions, building a new kind of society that becomes perhaps, and this is one of the things that I would argue, perhaps actually an example to other people or other countries in the world. Or we can descend into the French case, which is terror, guillotine, and quite frankly, one of the things that's making really people very uncomfortable in today's Ukraine, 6 years after the Maidan, is that we're not actually sure where we're going. There's some people that are building new institutions, and then there are others that are really unhappy with the way the country's being run, and certainly in foreign policy, certainly a lot of other areas. And I think that there's a lot of sort of pent-up unrest. Initially, that pent-up unrest was what ended up in 73% of a majority for a new president. But now there's a lot of people that are actually becoming unhappy with the way the country's continuing to be run. And that can be very dangerous. So I think that we're in a revolutionary process. Where it's going to lead is actually unknown. We've got 2 models that we can follow, the French and the American. Certainly, I hope we go by the American way, but where we in fact end up going, I think, is still an open book.
What does a revolution say about a society? Is the revolution the indication that the society has reached its breaking point, or what happens afterwards? And by breaking point, maybe a better analogy would be the straw that broke the camel's back.
I think that revolutions happen, and it's not just me that thinks this. This is something that sociology is sort of come up to, I think, as a science, if you like, is that revolutions happen, first of all, when societies are ripe for revolution. So in other words, when there's certain amounts of tension within the society, plus that gets put onto, strangely enough, new new social groups showing up. So in other words, for example, in Ukraine, we have, over the last 25 years, we've had the emergence of a sort of a creative class, a middle class of people that are generally urban dwellers, generally people that are involved in creating wealth, not necessarily through manufacturing something. So I'm thinking of IT people, designers, lawyers, university professors, people that are work with ideas, work with creativity. And those people are in fact kind of looking for a different way of developing the country. So I think that that's sort of the class aspect. But I think also very importantly is that we're a society that is at the level of a breaking point between large-scale changes. So, for example, the American and the French cases of revolutions, they happened when industrialization was starting. I don't think it's anybody's secret that it's secret to anybody that we're in a situation right now where we're into some sort of a post-industrial society. We're getting out of industrialism and going into some sort of a postmodern, post-industrial. We don't really know where it's going. But in that kind of civilizational break, it's pretty common that we find social unrest, political unrest, revolutions are actually are sort of a natural state for societies to go through.
But something I've noticed oftentimes, especially in Hong Kong, as a current example, the protesters are young. We have some pictures from the Maidan protests behind you. There were all ages involved and all levels of society. Is that something unique to the Maidan?
Well, we need to realize that the Maidan started with students. Okay, students were later sidelined because of the fact that students were very much involved in the Maidan, continuing for the 3 months, but the importance of students became much less after the first violence broke out. In other words, when we have the beating of students on the 30th of November, then we have the reaction of society at large. We have more than 50% of the protesters coming out on the streets on the 1st of December being from Kyiv, being locals, and included all classes, all genders, all age groups. Everyone was out. I mean, this was the first real uprising of over 1 million people. And then it continued on the 8th, and it continued, and it's in the Hong Kong case. Yes, you're right. It's primarily students, but we'll see where it goes. Because these types of movements, what we're finding is these kinds of postmodernist, post-industrial movements, where Maidan was kind of the first example of this. They are generally leaderless. They begin with youth, but they then encompass, if they're going to be successful in their aims, they then encompass sort of large masses or large numbers of people in society, and then they really lead to massive social change.
There's a lot of research involved with this topic. There's civil society, sociology, political science, revolutions, studies about revolutions. How many pages is your book?
Well, with notes, it's over 400, and text, we're at 374.
Do you feel like you were able to cover all of the important elements?
Look, this book is half of the book is what it's called is a Chronicle and Analysis. So one half of the book is approximately a half is a chronicle. So I'm sort of somebody that tries to bridge between activism and academia. I'm very much a Maidan activist. I was somebody that was on the Maidan for many, many months, for many nights, and I tried to get to the reader some of this sort of the emotional experiences of going through really something that was a very unique experience. I talk about it as being a feeling of humanity, a feeling of really being a person, and that's something that I try to get that across with a lot of quotations and a lot of sort of my own memories. And then the second half of the book is about analysis. Now, can you in 150 pages get across all of the areas that you're talking about? Probably not. But I think that I'm very grateful to Serhiy Plokhy, who is the chair of Ukrainian Studies at Harvard, who wrote the preface to this. And he says that, events, he quotes Virginia Woolf, and he says that events don't really happen until they're written about. So the idea here was to try to get, first of all, a bird's eye view and an activist view, but at the same time, a little bit of analysis. I think this is the first of many, perhaps not even the first, but one of many accounts of what we lived through. I think what's important about it is to realize that this is not just a little isolated event in a peripheral place called Kyiv. This is something that we don't, as Ukrainians perhaps don't even realize the extent to which we are influential on the way human civilization, human societies around the world are developing. I mean, where's Kyiv, where's Hong Kong? Where's Kyiv? Where's Washington? We've got something is going on in this country at the moment that is really of global significance, and I think that was kind of one of the things that I wanted to get across.
You described yourself as a participant observer, and you also said that once it's written down, it's really happened. Do you feel some type of personal responsibility closing this chapter of the research on this?
I do feel some sort of personal responsibility, but at the same time, I think that one of the important things is that most of the things that are written about Ukraine today are written Ukraine is portrayed as sort of this territory of geopolitical conflict. So you've got the West versus Russia fighting over Ukraine. And one of the things that I think is very important is to realize that we need to give people here voice. So that's why the book is actually part of a series called Ukrainian Voices, which will have a second volume, not of mine, but published in the new year. But the idea is to try to give people voice because there's an agency here. There's something going on here on the ground, and it's not just about a fight or a tug of war between Moscow and be it Brussels or Washington or whatever you want to put the centers of the West. It's about change that's happening here on the ground, and it's change that touches every single Ukrainian, and that single Ukrainian's changes are significant for the rest of the world as well. So I think that's kind of the idea of the book. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that responsibility is really the word. I think it's perhaps a reaction to sort of the mainstay out there, which looks at Ukraine as just being an object of somebody's interest.
Final question. Academics have a tendency to write academically. Is this something that someone that wants to learn about the history of Ukraine in this period, should they pick this one up?
I tried to write. If you like, there's a historian by the name of Tim Snyder who was very nice about writing a review of this. I really tried to write in the style of Timothy Snyder, Anne Applebaum, people that write in a sort of write about this area
with stories and people
and try to create something that's not just going to be an academic book. The second half is a little bit rough, but the first half is something that certainly is going to be giving people a flavor of what we lived through, and hopefully allowing the reader to also live through what we lived through.
Well, thank you very much for your time today. We enjoyed having you in the studio.
Thanks very much for having me.
That was Mychailo Wynnyckyj, writer and associate professor of sociology at the National Institute Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Thank you for watching UATV, and stay tuned for more.